Welcome back, Strategic Angling fans. This is episode number 11 of Strategic Angling, presented by K&K True Value in Bettendorf. I'm Brady Hanna. This is JJ Patton. You've seen him before. We wanted to talk with you today about basically the Finesse worm game. Over the years, this has really blown up with more fishing pressure and people figuring out how to catch tougher fish to catch. But our plan is to talk about some of the different jig heads, worms, what we use, what you can find at K&K, and go from there. So JJ's going to start us off. He's got a couple of topics to cover, and then I've got a couple, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hey guys, how you doing? So Finesse worms, obviously, like Brady said, they're becoming more and more popular. One of the things that's kind of led to that is fishing pressure. The other thing is environmental controls that cleaned up the water, zebra mussels on the Great Lakes. So the water's clear, more people are out, it's pressured. So finesse worms are a good option when you're looking for something to get bit. If it's a natural, it's unobtrusive, it's real good in clear water, pressured water. If it's dead slick, calm, post-frontal. Also, especially if you're around smallmouth or spotted bass, a little morsel is a little more appetizing, I think, to smallmouth and spots than maybe their greener cousins. Also, if you're taking kids, it's a good way to get bites, and you might catch an 8-incher, you might catch a 6-pounder, but it's a good way to get bites. So if you're taking kids or younger people, it's a good experience for them to be able to get bit and reel something in. Probably the most common, I would say, way to fish finesse worm would be a shaky head. And basically most companies that pour lead make a shaky head. I like ones with screw locks on them. I just think it holds the worm better. You don't go through as many worms. 1/8 ounce is probably a good starting spot. If you're fishing super deep, maybe a quarter. Not on the finesse topic, but there are a lot of guys throwing Magnum shaky heads with 1/2 ounce and 10-inch worms and things like that. But 1/8 ounce shaky head with a screw lock on it, and you can basically rig that worm. Basically, you just screw it onto the screw lock and then Texas rig it in. There's plenty of how-tos probably on how to do that on YouTube. It's a good way. It's good because it's weedless. It's great for brush pile fishing. It skips well if you're around docks. It just comes through everything and gets bit. So the shaky head is probably my go-to, I guess. If I needed a bite, it's probably the one thing I would throw.
Perfect. I will start off by talking about the Ned rig craze. This has really taken off in the last few years as an amazing way to catch fish, and it surprisingly works. For how lame and little these things look, they catch fish no matter where you're at, really the time of year. If you need a bite and nothing else is working, probably a Ned rig is the move to make. Now, that being said, I like to fish my Ned rigs maybe a little differently than most. If I'm going to go fish big water, Great Lakes, super clean, I'll use the traditional, Z-Man finesse kind of shroom style head with the hook exposed. And this is perfectly fine. That's how most people do it. But around here, dealing a lot with vegetation, snags. So I find myself usually trying to use something like this, and I believe K&K has these. It's the Owner Blockhead Ultra Head. It's a newer style presentation for the Ned, and it's actually allows it to have the traditional Ned head, but it allows you to Texas rig it so it can stay weedless, and you can flip it into laydowns and things like that. So that one will present the bait still how it's been designed to kind of float upright. And this one is a good option. And then the other thing I like to do, and again, there's probably good videos out there, I know Fighter's done it, I like to fish a big TRD. So the normal Ned rig is called the Finesse TRD, and I know this defeats the purpose a little bit of a Ned rig, but I like to use the bigger one on the river. I use the big TRD for the chicken rig. You've heard of that? Mm-hmm. Where you put the nail weight, and I've got some here. It's the Nico Shrooms by Z-Man. I go heavy. This is like a 1/6 ounce. You could probably go a little lighter, but it was windy when I bought them. In my mind, I suppose. And you jam this wacky rig weight up the bottom of the big TRD, and then you actually Texas rig the hook at the top. So the weight is separate from the hook, allowing you to actually hop through things. You're still upright, but the weight's at the bottom, the line's at the top. I think it's a little even more weedless than this option, but I like to do both those things with Ned rigs. And as far as brands go, if it's really, really tough and you want to dead stick this thing, which is pretty much how it's designed to be fished, you should choose a Z-Man, because as far as I know, nobody else is really making this plastic like they are with the way these float. Missile Baits has I think it's called the Ned Bomb. It's got a little tail on it. This one I would maybe choose if I was kind of hopping it and I wanted just a little kick action, but don't let anybody convince you that any other Ned rig floats dead straight up like a Z-Man TRD product does. The other one I like to use, those are the two Ned rigs I use, is the Ned Bomb and the big TRD, or the Finesse TRD for Ned rigs.
I think, like Brady was just saying, the Z-Man product floats, and I think whatever Ned rig you're going to use, whatever brand you pick, make sure that it floats. It's something about that floating up action that I think is real important. The other thing about the Z-Man stuff is you can get one package of TRDs and that'll last you 100 fish. I mean, they just simply don't tear. You don't go through baits. I would agree. I use the Finesse Shrooms. I also use this one is a Finesse Shrooms with a wire weed guard. It's semi weedless. Like if you're around rocks, it might keep them from wedging in the rocks and digging into the rocks. Z-Man also makes a Texas rig style one that I sometimes will use as well. But I think, like Brady said, if you want a bite, that's the bait. It's simple, easy, super easy to fish. You just throw it out. You can drag it, you can hop it, you can do nothing with it, because when it's doing nothing, it's sitting there and that tail's up in the air, waving around, and they'll come find it.
Yeah, the most effective presentation for these, as painful it is dead stick.
Yeah.
Don't move it. Cast it out, let it get to the bottom, let it sit, reel it in, do it again. That's at least how I find worst case scenario if we're getting bites is I go to a Ned rig. So
yeah.
Moving on, what else you got?
Wacky rig is another method. Usually what you'll do for a wacky rig is you'll take either a Senko or a Finesse worm, and you're going to rig it right in the middle. So you're going to hook your bait right through the middle, or hook your hook right through the middle of that bait, and it's going to hang like this and flop on the way down. It's real good in shallow water when they're spawning or cruising and you can see them. You can throw it out in front of them. A 5-inch Senko or 4-inch Senko is a real good way to do that. This is a Zoom Finesse worm. There's you can rig straight through like I just did, where you punch it through. You can also experiment. Do you want it right on the egg sac, or do you want it dead center of the worm? And you can play around with it a little bit that way. They make these fancy tools that you can get an O-ring on. The O-rings will help last longer. One of the problems I find with an O-ring and a wacky bait is then your hook is sideways, which works in a Nico. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I like the hook to be sideways through, or perpendicular to the length of the worm. But if you are using a wacky rig and you want to use an O-ring, they make these tools. I've also found that a Bic pen works, especially on really small ones like a robo worm. You can put the O-rings on this end, slide the worm in, and then just slide the O-ring up until it's where you want it on the bait. And the third way to do it is get one of these tools. There's a company making these in the fishing industry. These may or may not be contraband from a medical supply kit, but and also while we're on the wacky, Gamakatsu makes a wacky jig head, which is a little bit of weight, and it's rigged the same. You just punch it through the middle of there, this gives it a little more weight if you're fishing a little bit deeper, or dropping it through suspended bass over deep water or something. You can kind of use that lead head style, but still has that wacky style hook. On the hooks, a lot of times I use a split shot drop shot from Gamakatsu, which is the same hook that's in this wacky jig head. You can use a straight shank, and just rig it however you're confident. They make Nico hooks, which also work for that. VMC, I think, makes a good Nico hook. So that's kind of wacky rigs.
To add that on the wacky deal, yeah, we've talked Senkos, but at $1 a piece or whatever they've ended up being, I've tried to experiment not using Senkos, but if fishing's really tough, I'll bite the bullet and use one. But play with the rate of fall. Find out which one. Try the off-brand ones. I mean, Berkeley has one now called the General, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've tried that with sink rate, but for me, I like a wacky worm that sinks, because some of those knockoffs don't sink very fast, and you'll just waste your time and never really get down to the fish you're trying to catch. I mean, Strike King also has one they call the Shimmy Shake. This is the KVD one.
It seems to me most of the off-brands don't sink like a Senko.
No.
The one that, but sometimes that's good if you're in super shallow water and you just want it floated up there, or you're in a foot of water and there's weeds a foot down or something, you just want it ticking the tops. That's good. Mm-hmm. So you can use that, and you see guys with success with all different brands, but I tend to go back to the Senko too. Yamamoto wouldn't like me telling you this. There's one trick besides O-rings also that works. If you can go on Amazon or online and get straws of varying diameter, and you can get clear straws and cut them into 1/2-inch pieces, and find the piece that the Senko fits through, and just slide it down there on like normal, hook through that, and that clear straw won't change the color or anything like that, but it does give the hook something to hold on to other than the worm. Mm-hmm. And that's a way to save a few dollars if you wanted.
Yeah, I don't remember what company's doing it, but somebody's making almost like a little worm with the Teflon thing to go through it too now.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But really play with the sink. Find one that you like that sinks the way you want it to. The Senkos are really expensive, but that's because nobody has been able to copy their proprietary blend that makes that action happen. So what next? Oh, drop shots. So we've talked about Ned rigs, we talked about Senko fishing. The other good one to talk about this time of year is drop shots, especially as you move closer towards the spawn. You can really get away with drop shotting an awful lot. It really more so depends there on kind of the forage you're trying to imitate. And the rule of thumb with the drop shot is the less leader you have, the more aggressive fish you're targeting. Would you agree? And the higher the leader, more towards that 18-inch range, more finesse dead stick presentation, just letting it sink naturally on the bottom. And if you've never heard of a drop shot, which is probably incredibly unlikely, the way that works is you put a weight at the very bottom with a tag end to it going to a hook, 12 to 18 inches up from that. Traditionally, I think most people are using cheap lead weights for this. I've gotten a little spendy. I hate waiting for that 1/4 ounce to sink, especially if I'm fishing bigger smallmouth stuff or a windy Lost Grove. It just never gets to the bottom, and if it does, you don't feel a thing. So I spent a little money, and Matt's got these, I'm sure, down at K&K. I got some tungsten ones in like the round eye drop type shape, that are heavier. I can get 1/4 ounce, 3/8. I've even got some that are 1/2 ounce, because the point of the drop shot is to get that thing to the bottom and get it in the fish's face. If fish are eating your drop shot on the fall, I would say you're not probably using the right bait. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Because that means that fish is aggressive. It's eating falling stuff. You could probably use something else. The point of the drop shot for me is get it on the bottom, get it dragging, get it in fish's face. So, having said that, there's a few different plastics that I like myself using. This is all stuff I got down at K&K that I use. My probably go-to is actually this Big Bite Baits Limit Maker. I found this 2 years ago when I was going up north to Mille Lacs to fish for smallmouth, and that's probably because they eat a lot of goby, but this thing catches largemouth, smallmouth. It doesn't imitate a whole lot. It's got a little tail at the end that has a little subtle action, but it's just like a little nice snack for him. I know Matt's got these, the Limit Maker. I don't see people use these a ton. And then some of the other main staples for me in my drop shot is if I want to use a worm, I'll use a Robo Worm. And I know K&K has these. I've caught some of my biggest smallmouth ever on a Robo Worm. And the hooks I will use, there's really two options. And one is the nose style exposed hook that looks pretty similar to a wacky setup. Has nice action when you move it. It dangles the worm, but it's not weedless. So if you're fishing rock, probably can use that hook no problem. But if you're near weeds or anything that's going to grab that hook, I transition to a straight shank, and that allows me to basically Texas rig my drop shot. I can flip it into laydowns. I could, it has a really good hookup ratio because it's a straight shank, and that works especially well on those really small worms. And a good one to use is this. I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but this Finesse heavy cover kind of worm style hook, a good river hook to use for drop shots. And one other thing I want to add on drop shots is as we get closer to the spawn, you see it on MLF, you'll see it on Bass Elites. There's guys throwing floating worms and worms on drop shots, more power drop shot setups where they're almost flipping them in there. And they're doing that because, if you think about fish on the spawn, they're not necessarily feeding on the bottom. They want to get that, worm right in that fish's strike zone, the face, and piss it off. And I would agree that there's times where you flip in on fish all day on a bed and you put a drop shot on a worm in a color they maybe haven't seen, and you might find yourself a bite. So that's a long-winded chat about drop shots and how I fish them.
Yeah, and I think one thing you alluded to bed fishing with a drop shot. The other nice thing about a drop shot bed fish, you can put a heavier weight on and a longer leader and literally throw the weight past the bed so that your line is going through the bed basically, and you can get that worm to fall over and over right on the bed with never moving the weight. You just slack it up, pull it up, slack it up, and it'll drop, and that's a good way to bed fish. Drop shot also, suspended bass. I'm not by any means an expert on this, but if you watch some of the elite stuff on the Great Lakes, they'll have smallmouth that are suspended. They'll use it to get the bait down to the level of the fish, and then video game them with that. It's a good bait, you can use it a lot of different ways. Like Brady said, you use the Finesse, or the rebarb hook is a good one, Texas rigging, or the drop shot, split shot hook. And really you can use any bait you want. I mean, you can drop shot a tube, you can drop shot a swim bait, and any kind of worm. So.
And one other thing I'll add about drop shots before I move on, you watch those guys on the Elite Series or whatever series you watch, there's times they're drifting drop shots, down current and river, like St. Lawrence especially comes to mind. But then, most times you see a drop shot fish, they're in greater than 10 feet of water. Mm-hmm. They're fishing that thing basically vertically, looking at their electronics. They don't think they're going to disrupt the fish being 20 feet above them. So they're not, I see a lot of people who cast drop shots as far as they can, and that's really not the purpose of a drop shot style bait, in my opinion. It's more getting on top of them, video gaming with your electronics a little bit, but you have way more feel and control of your bait when you're more on top of it than a long cast away. So
yeah, one last tip on that too is when you get a drop shot weight, a lot of them will have this little slot where you pull the line up, and the purpose of that is if you snag, the weight's going to be down the bottom, the lure's going to be up here, so you can snag the weight, pop the weight off, and then you'll reel in your lure and it'll just have a tag, and you can put a new weight on. You don't have to completely retie. Mm-hmm. And another advantage while you're talking about that is if you're around zebra mussels or something that's fraying your line, your line between your lure and your rod is never in those mussels. It's down here. So you're not going to break off fish because you got a nick in your line above, the nick in the line is going to be down here, and you might lose a weight, which stinks, but you're not going to lose a 5-pounder. So advantage, drop shot on that too.
Yeah, maybe somebody said you get to choose one lure to catch smallmouth with the rest of your life, and I'm not on the Mississippi River. I'm probably selecting a drop shot because it just can be fished so many different ways and so many different presentations. So, what's up next here?
Oh, we got Nico rigs. That's another kind of a spin-off of the Nico, however you want to say it. I apologize if I'm saying it wrong, but it's another spin-off kind of the Finesse worm style that I believe came from Japan. It's kind of a wacky rig style, and I'll kind of show you. So you kind of rig it the same. You have the worm. You do use an O-ring for this, so you put the O-ring on, and then you take a nail weight and you stick it in the head of this thing. Now this is a Dobbins nail weight. I like this one because it does have a big ball on the end, as well as just the nail that goes in. Some guys just use finishing nails. You can use just about anything, just puts a little weight. But you can cut the end of that off too if you don't like having that much weight or that thing on the end.
And one thing to add quick, you put that O-ring probably 2/3 of the way down the worm, versus the wacky is more centered so it falls flat. You want this hook closer towards the bottom.
So it's down here.
Yeah.
And so there's the weight is in there, and then you just take your drop shot, split shot hook. This is a different hook, and hook it in through the nail weight like that. So then this is not the right hook for this bait, by the way. You can tell it's too
I got Nico hooks right here. They make a hook specifically for this application where it's got a weirder angle on the bend,
but you can see the hopefully you can see the so when that thing falls on the bottom, it's sitting like that. You can hop it in place. It's good for fishing around docks. It's good for vertical structure like seawalls or bridge abutments because it'll get down quicker than a wacky rig. It's a real effective way to catch fish, and it's really coming into its own the last couple of years, I'd say.
And JJ showed you that with hook out. There's a lot of people who also put hook facing inward to try to be just a little bit more weedless. When you do that, you maybe lose a touch of the hookup ratio that you get with hook out, but I see a lot of people who are fishing this around cover will go hook in. So.
Or you can do that chicken rig like you were doing, and that's almost, essentially a chicken rig is almost a Nico rig, except you can actually Texas rig in the middle of the bait too, and then still have, like if you Texas rig like that, and you have kind of a modified chicken rig.
Yep.
Then it's weedless too, yeah. But I agree. I don't like to have the hook in because I don't. It just doesn't make sense to me that they'd be able to catch the hook, but. That's a way to Texas rig it. So
And Nico is a little newer, and it's become wildly effective, I think, in the last couple of years as well. And you're not having to. They don't really. I mean, 13 fishing I think makes a Nico worm, but as far as Nico worms, you really can do this with most worms. I'd say you can do it with Senkos. You can do it with
Robo worms, Zoom Finesse worm, Senkos. I don't know that I like a Senko as well for that because I do like that tail to kind of float up a little bit, and that heavy salt in there. I don't feel like there's as much freedom of movement in a Senko as there is. But,
no, I would definitely not choose Senko first, but just saying you don't have to go out and buy specific worms for Nico. Just try around and see what works for you, where you fish, and I guess let us know how you do. Yeah,
buy a bag of your favorite Finesse worms and try rigging them different ways. Go out to a pond or a small lake and just get bit. It's fun.
Yeah.
Color, we didn't touch on color. I would say if you're gonna pick one, green pumpkin, or some variation of green pumpkin, probably is. You can't really go wrong with it. I mean, look at Brady's selection here. It's pretty much all green pumpkin.
If you look at what I brought out, I've got green pumpkin with red. I got straight green pumpkin. I got green pumpkin with blue. I got green pumpkin with silver. For clear water stuff, you can't go wrong with green pumpkin something.
Right.
When the water's a little dirty, but I still think they can see pretty well, you go black and blue. If you're feeling really frisky, you can try, just a pumpkin or red. I was throwing red down in Gunnersville while we really caught all those fish down there. Try what works. That's the cool thing about Senko, or Yamamoto specifically, is how many different color combos of Senkos are out there?
I hate to guess.
I think it's in the hundreds.
In the hundreds, for sure.
So, Yeah, I mean, do you have anything else you want to cover today with our finesse worm topic?
I think we got it.
All right. Well, appreciate you guys tuning in to another episode of Strategic Angling presented by K&K True Value. If you get a chance, go down there. I think 99% of this stuff got bought down at K&K, which is just awesome that you can find all this down there. Give this Big Bite Limit Maker a try, but not at Lost Grove.
I'd like to try that Big Bite Bait Smallie Smasher. I've not used it. I saw it online. It's a paddle tail drop shot type of bait, but it's got ribbed bodies and it's got a paddle tail. I think in the dirtier water it might be a little more. They might be able to find it a little better. So I'm really looking forward to that.
You brought up. I know we're trying to end this, but you brought up one point I didn't touch on drop shot, and that is actually using it. Well, maybe we'll save this for the next video.
Yeah,
we're gonna save that for the next video. We're ending this one. Episode 11 is over. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next week on another episode of Strategic Angling.
Thanks, guys.